Hi, my name is Doug Sundheim, and you're listening to Leadership Biz Cafe.
Hi everyone, this is Tammy Nasir, and on today's episode of Leadership Biz Cafe, I'll be talking with Doug Sundheim. Doug is the president of the Sundheim Group, a consulting agency that focuses on strategy execution and team development, and whose clients include Time Warner, SAP, International Baccalaureate Organization, and Morgan Stanley. In addition to being a regular contributor to the Harvard Business Review, Doug is the author of the book Taking Smart Risks: How Sharp Leaders Win When Stakes Are High, which will be the focus of this episode. Hi, Doug. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Tim.
You know, a few years ago, there was this adaptation that so many of us had to come to terms with, and that was that we couldn't normalize change into being the new normal, but that we had to accept continuous change and adaptation to change as being par for the course of this new, faster-paced, globally connected environment. And I can tell you, looking back over the past 5-10 years, I've seen that evolution in mindset from wondering where the endpoint of today's change lies to wondering what the next wave of change will bring and how do we navigate these new waters. But while we might be more at ease, I'll say, with change, there's something that we've all seen and perhaps experienced in the past 2 years or so, and that is how we're now operating in this environment of increasing risk. And that's what made me think of your book, Doug, because as you write in the opening chapter of your book, what we dread most about taking risks is not simply the uncertainty it will give rise to, but more that fear of failure. That it's better to avoid or steer clear of taking risks and play it safe than to suffer some form of failure. But of course, we've seen many examples recently and over the past couple of years of established and storied companies playing it safe can come with a lot steeper cost than any potential failure might fear in taking that deep dive. And as you write in your book, through your own work, you found that there are actually 5 distinct dangers that come from playing it safe. So before we talk about taking smart risks, I was wondering if you could describe what these 5 dangers are from playing it safe.
Sure. I mean, the dangers of playing it safe are, I don't know that I have them in the exact order that I wrote them, can't quite remember, but the idea that you lose your momentum in whatever you're working on. I mean, I think I'd probably pull back, and before diving into what those I'd love to kind of touch on something else that you were bringing up about the speed of change, because I think it kind of precedes some of these risks, which is I think there's this belief that the world is changing really fast, and we've got to, as the expression says, innovate or die, right? We need to innovate or die. And, one of my fundamental problems with that is the idea of innovation tends to stand front and center. And you've got boards of directors, C-suite executives all in place. What we need is innovation. We need innovation. And I think that is ass backwards, because an innovation is a solution. And it's a solution to a problem. And I think oftentimes people think that the solution is to innovate more. But the real problem is, what are your customers experiencing now? How do we solve that? And lo and behold, if you stay there, you come up with innovations. And the reality is that's what risk-taking is. The risk-taking is getting I've really, even since I've written the book, I've come to believe more and more and more that the closer you get to the customer, the closer you get, and whatever the customer is. I mean, if you're an actor, the customer is, the audience. If you're selling soap, it's the soap buyer, and so on. It's whoever's consuming whatever you're doing. If you get into their minds, what are they thinking about? What do they believe? What do they not believe? How are they evolving? How are they changing? The solutions start to present themselves. They start to just show up what I should be doing. And that decreases your fear of failure, because you feel so close to the need that you're willing to jump in and take some risks. Actually, one of the stories I write about the book was how Sherwin-Williams did this. 2008 financial crash happens. There is, it's kind of a long story. I'll try to go through it very quickly, but 2008 financial crash happens. They had for a long time been competing to open up paint stores. And the big insight they had 25, 30 years ago was contractors don't travel very far for paint because their time is money and they're on a paint job, so they'll go to whatever paint store is closest. So the insight they had was open up as many retail stores as we possibly can, saturate an area, and our share of market will grow faster than everyone else. So they did that. It was really successful. Real estate got really expensive. They could no longer do that because every other paint contractor started doing that. But they had this insight, and they did the research, and they knew that time was money, and that drove everything they did. So when the crash happened and real estate started to get cheap and people didn't buy, they said, let's double down. We know that's the insight. And it was in many ways an innovation distribution to really continually saturate a market. But it was only because they really knew that their customers, what was driving the behavior of their customers through research they had done, that when it was a really risky bet, and the shareholders pushed back against them, we're in a recession and you're going up and you're signing new leases all over the place, you crazy? And they said, we're going to come out of the recession, there are going to be homes built again, and we know that people are going to want to, people have to paint those, and we are going to be in a good position. We're not going to shutter stores. We're going to open them. And it turned out, I think by 2009, 2010, their stock rebounded, and it turned out to be a very smart bet. So you could say, hey, they weren't afraid of failure, and that's true. But in reality, they were solving a customer problem. And it's something I think that kind of drives me a little crazy when I hear people talk about innovation as a process or a product itself. It's not. All of us innovate. We all innovate every day, and we do it best when we have a problem right in front of us. So I don't want to step over that whole idea of fear of failure, and that in reality, it's really just I would actually reframe it as it's not really fear of failure. I mean, yeah, we all have that. That's a basic human reaction, but it's lack of true being in the mindset of your customers that has you not really see what the right next steps are to make and to do. So I hope that didn't go too far off and that kind of made sense, but I've been thinking a lot about that topic for the past couple of years, and I think it's a really important one.
No, I think it actually is very much on point, because the idea here, and I completely agree with you, is that we shouldn't innovate just for the sake of innovation. There should be some pragmatic, practical reason behind it. What is the pain point, or what is the solution that it's going to allow us to offer that people are genuinely interested in, saying, yes, that's going to help improve things, make things better. And in many ways, this is kind of what is the very definition of what you're talking about in your book about when it comes to taking risks, that okay, we shouldn't take risks just for the sake of taking risks, right? We don't want to suddenly become, risk is kind of like disruption. We just got to disrupt things because we can. It's really about taking, as you call them, smart risks. These are risks that the payoff is there because it's going to lead to the resolution of some problem or the opening up of a new opportunity that's not being addressed that you can then tap into.
Exactly. And and even as you just said that, it seems so obvious, right? Well, don't just innovate for innovation's sake, innovate to solve a problem. When you say that, it sounds, oh yeah, of course, that's obvious. But and I think you've probably experienced this, and you've seen this in organizations. But it's not, right? You see people trying their darndest to innovate. Innovation takes on a life of its own. They think it's so important. But in reality, if you start from a really well-crafted problem statement that has a lot of clear, in the marketing world, they write up personas. What is the persona of these 2 or 3 customers that are feeling this pain point? Don't give it to me in a vague or cliche way. Tell me, to keep going with this painting contractor example, if you were to write a persona, John goes into work on Saturday, on a Friday. He's had a really tough time managing all these different clients. It's always hard in his business to manage, supply of his workers with the demand and making sure he can get the right painters at the right time. And it's always been a challenge. And he's a little bit worried right now about his family and what's going on. And can he make enough money? And he wants someone to make his life easier. And there's a few different places, and you go through how to make the life easier, and you come up pretty quickly with the insight of like, let's not make John travel very far for paint. And so what seems like an a distribution innovation in the paint world is like just an obvious answer to an obvious problem. And I really think that most innovations and most risks really are, when you get down to it, like obvious answers to obvious problems that become less and less risky every time you think about it. One of the things I often talk about is this idea of you just need to get yourself to like a 65 to 75% surety that it's a good idea. It might not work, but it's a good idea. In my book, I talk, see the future now. It sounds like, you get a crystal ball and you're, all these data points and you're doing some really, fantastical modeling to figure it out. No, see the future now is like spend a whole bunch of time with Johns in the painting world. You're like, I see the future. They'd love it if they had just had paint stores closer, or, something around an innovation in the sneaker world. It's not any sort of high-minded, brainstorming in some creative pod where all the smartest people who can do data analytics. It's like, get in there. Yeah, data analytics will help, but get in there. Just tell the stories. Like, what's going on with the customer? What's his pain point? How's he feeling this? How's he feeling that? And then all of a sudden it's like, we should do this. Yeah, of course we should do that. That's so obvious now. So again, just another way to look at fear of failure. Fear of failure is really, I think, born from you not spending enough time with the problem.
Okay, so now that we've kind of gotten this understanding of how we can better approach and understand the fear of failure that kind of holds us back, not just in terms of innovation, but also in terms of embracing those moments where we have to take those smart risks. Let's dive right now into the real meat of your book, and that is, how can we take what you call these smart risks? And before we begin that, though, I think we need to have a common frame of reference in terms of how we view and understand risk, because as you write, how we perceive our situation impacts how we understand the nature of the risk we're about to take.
Yeah. So, one of the things I talk about is this idea of find something worth fighting for. I mean, what is going to contextualize all the pain you're about to go through when you're taking a risk, and by contextualize, I mean what's going to make it worthwhile, to do it, getting yourself in a mindset for that's something that I would want to really fight for is so there's 5 big sections of the book. All of them, I say, are just one step closer to decreasing the amount of risk. Think of it this way. If when you go into any, harebrained idea, when you're out, having dinner with your family one day, we should do this business, or I should do that, you're at like a 25% chance, probably a 10% chance of succeeding, 90% chance of failing. And, I think that taking smart risks is really about, I can never get to a 100% chance of succeeding and 0% chance of failing. But how do I begin to shift that dynamic until, like I said, you get to about that 65 to 75% surety that you could succeed? So that's what the 5 sections of the book are really about. Each one is designed to pull out a little bit more of the risk and help increase your chances of success a little bit more and more. And so the first one is this idea of find something worth fighting for. And that's the idea of, I didn't want to use the word passion because, sometimes that's kind of overused. It can mean lots of things in different people, but, find something that you're willing to take a few licks, take a few hits, get a few scars, and when you come out of it, you'll still be motivated because it's a really important thing to you. So I think in many ways, that's one of the most important things, because it creates a grounding in something that's going to keep you motivated. Um, the next one is this idea of see the future now. Get into those, like I said, personas in marketing. Get into the customer's mindset. How do they buy it? What do they think about? How do they? I keep saying customers, but this can also work just internally. If you're doing, let's say, internal project management at a bank, and you're doing large-scale change around technical systems, let's say, you still want to see the future now. Your customers there are the bank employees, and they have needs in how they're delivering services to their customers. So same sort of thing. Go through the stories. How's this going to work? How's that going to work? How's this going to work? So that will also begin to take more and more risk and deliver to you more and more certainty that the idea is probably heading in the right direction. Act fast, learn fast. We've heard a lot about this. That's the next big section of the book, and that's okay. Great, you got the insights. What are you going to do? Well, until you experiment, you don't even know if your insights are that good. So let's try it. How can I do it in a way that's not going to totally burn me? Can I pilot this? Can I do a small batch run of that? Can we get some input over here? And then you're going back with that act fast, learn fast. And you're then going and you're recreating your vision for the future. Those are the three big things. So it's those three. The next two are kind of creating a context for those things to happen. But those are the three big things. Something that I want to fight for. I start to go out and get smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter every day about the problem and how people are acting, the nuances, how people are framing the problem, and what they would actually buy versus what they would theoretically buy. It's very different when you ask someone, what are you going to spend versus actually getting them to part with money from their wallet. And then act fast, learn fast. Keep doing that rapid iterations. So those three kind of form the nut of what I would call smart risk taking. And I mean, if you go back 100, 200 years, it was the same. It's always been the same thing. I mean, that is the story of successful business right there in a nutshell.
So, Doug, you just mentioned how one of the first critical steps to making sure we are taking those smart risks is to first identify what you called something worth fighting for, that goal or idea where the pain point is greater in our not doing something to affect change as opposed to playing it safe and trying to not change some aspect of our current reality. And when I read this, what came to my mind was something that I usually identify as doing purpose-led work, that we're not simply doing something or pushing forward an initiative either to keep up with our competition is doing, or what we see as being today's shining object that everyone's enraptured by, which is kind of what we were discussing at the beginning of this conversation in terms of innovation. Are we just innovating for the sake of innovation, or are we doing it because we're trying to resolve a situation or to tap into a future opportunity? Now, I did a TEDx talk recently where I shared my own story of how it was only by finding that sense of purpose when I was doing and being able to articulate what is the value of what I'm doing, of how my own way I'm moving the needle in making things better or making a difference, that I felt a genuine sense of enduring success and fulfillment. And, what was interesting about giving that talk was how in so many conversations with attendees at this TED event, there was this common question I was asked of, how do I find that sense of purpose in what I do? Because I don't feel it. And for some, they weren't even sure they ever did. And this was interesting because when I turned the focus onto looking at their past work experiences in a very short period of time, as we discussed their past memorable moments and the times they felt challenged, they began to realize, wait a minute, there was a point in time where I felt a sense of meaning and purpose, that I felt pride in what I did. And I was willing to push myself, to challenge myself, to improve how I did this work. So as much as we might think purpose-led work is something that only select few can experience, the reality is that it's there for the picking if we know what to look for. So in terms of taking these smart risks, Doug, what should we be looking for to know that this idea, this project, this goal is something worth fighting for?
Yeah, I wish I had an easy answer to that, because obviously the formulaic answer to that is one that is just probably inauthentic, but this idea of experimenting, and in the book I talk about this idea that you call it the kind of 3 Ds of figuring out what your something worth fighting for, what your purpose led work or your passion, whatever words really work for you are. And, I think the lucky few, they're just destined for it. The prodigy at age 5 in an instrument, or, the person who just absolutely knows they love some business and they start working, on coding something when they're 9 or 10. The simple truth is, 99% of us don't have that. And so we've got to come across it another way. And some people later in life, they get it. This is the second D. That's kind of destiny. The second one is you get it delivered to you. Something bad happens in and around your world, and you want to fight for some sort of legislative changes, or things of that nature. But and that's again a very small number of us. But for the most part, it's a process of discovery. How curious are you? How can you just keep a variety of different balls in the air? I don't have any data on this, but if I were to guess, a lot of times it doesn't really get clear. And this is just kind of now having coached a variety of executives over 20 years. I tend to see it's not until you're probably, in your mid 30s at the earliest, sometimes not to your 40s, where you start just saying, you know what? Okay, I've been doing these like kind of 10 different things, and I just don't, these 8, I can do them really well. I can probably make a living at them, but I don't love it. But these other 2, it's like, man, when I'm in that space and I'm doing it, it's just things feel like they're clicking. And don't give up until, and also if you still have the 10 and you're like, I don't know, I'm 45 and I don't know what the hell you're talking about, then that's okay too. Don't worry about it. Just keep trying to make a difference in the ways that you want to make a difference. And I honestly think, again, I wrote the third D as discovery. I think what that discovery really is, the more it's been about 5 years since I wrote the book, and I think it's more of it's a peeling away. I would say that the thing that you would love and really would be passionate about, if you're listening to this podcast and you're in your mid 20s and you have that question, or you're in the early 30s, you have that question, you say, gosh, I don't know what it is at all. I would say you do, you have it, you're in some way living it right now, but you're also living, 15 other things that really aren't it. And you're not seeing the signal for the noise. And so I think it's a paring away of what really matters. Every time I'm faced with a challenge at work, I just love this aspect of things. And you just always say to yourself, but you know what? I always have to do these 30 other things too. And I think as you get older, you go, you know what? No, I don't have to do those other things. Screw that. I'm just going to do these few critical things, and I'm great at it. And I love it. I mean, for me in my own work, I started off more generally in the leadership development world, but it wasn't until the last several years that I said, you know what, I just like working with very senior teams who are struggling to advance the ball on the line together. I don't necessarily, I don't do trainings anymore. I don't do quote unquote just straight leadership work. I like working in context, in strategy with just very senior teams. That's a hard thing to say when you're first starting out, because maybe that's not the business you can get. So stick with it and keep that kind of pairing process until you get down to the nugget and the core of what's really important to you.
It also reminds me of something that you mentioned earlier when we were discussing this whole idea about taking smarter risks, and the example you gave of Sherwin-Williams, and this notion of how we have to see the world through our customers' eyes. So that basically informs those intuitive points that we all have. And then as the more we discuss with other people who are having those touch points with our customers, they kind of have those insights that when you start piecing it together, you start noticing things. And so it is a question of making the time, literally stopping, and to have these conversations. And then after that, really deciding what it is exactly you want to do going forward, which is probably why a lot of us struggle with risk, because we're not giving ourselves that opportunity to really just put the brakes on our day. We're just too busy in reactive mode to actually sit down and say, let's think about this, let's discuss this, let's touch base with other people, get their insights, and so we can, as you say, see the world through our customers' eyes.
Exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's a timing issue. I think there's a cultural issue. If you're not busy doing something, some transactional thing right now, you're not adding value. If you're just kind of daydreaming a little bit, you're not adding value. Someone with their feet on the desk, sitting back and throwing a ball around with a friend, just kind of shooting the breeze. That's not the idea of a productive person. Productive person's got their head down, they're working, and they're advancing some task that has probably a pretty short-term timeline in which it needs to be delivered. And oh, by the way, it's now years later, and you've just kind of been shuffling the papers around the same desk. The big ideas never come. I think you're right that it has more to do with just taking the time to do that, seeing that as valuable. And now if we go up to the organizational level, actually having bosses that believe that that's valuable, that encourage that don't come down with the whip in seeing people engage in those sorts of activities is really important. They've got to be productive. It's not just, we like to play ping pong 4 hours a day. They've got to be productive. So you got to kind of experiment with ways to talk about ideation and the value of it in the organization. But you do need that time for creative thinking. I mean, one of the things I work with a lot of clients on, for example, is just pretty simple thing. Carve out, just show me. Let's go look at your calendar. We take a look at the calendar. Show me where do you do some creative thinking, in here, and it's kind of like I don't. I mean, more and more these days, I see people's calendars are scheduled from 8:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. with every sort of meeting you could imagine. Yeah. And sometimes I just say, guess what? I don't care where you do it. You're going to pick 3 or 4 hours somewhere. If you could do 2 hours here, 2 hours there, great. You're carving it out. Well, how am I going to do that? You're just going to do it. You're going to schedule it, and you're going to figure out how to answer the questions if people ask you about it. Because unless you just carve that time out, it's not going to show up. I think we all love to think, okay, and that's sometimes there's a lot of research that says, well, that's not the best way to do it. Sometimes your best ideas come to you in the shower, right? And that's fine. That's good. And it may be that if you're sitting down and every Friday morning from 9 a.m. to 11, you're just kind of like reading some interesting stuff you don't normally get to read. That will work in the background. And then 3 days later, when you're in the shower, the idea will come. But you have to have laid that groundwork for it to happen. So that's another point that I think is really important.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, to your point, it is that common thing that the good ideas come to me in my shower. Well, that's because it's the one time you schedule in your day, or one of the few times in your day where you schedule where I'm not going to be working. I'm not going to be in a meeting. I'm not going to be replying to these emails, writing that memo, and so forth. So that's the time you actually give your brain time to wander and start making those intuitive connections and so forth. And the very thing that you're pointing out about scheduling it, I've actually even had this discussion with clients, because I've had leaders say to me, well, look, I love this idea of doing this, but I don't have time in my day to do that. And I said, of course you don't have time, because everything's scheduled. And I'll be honest with you, if you don't schedule this, it's never going to happen. It's just going to be this quaint, nice idea, wish I had the time for. And unfortunately, you don't have the luxury of saying, well, this is something that is a luxury. This is mission critical if you're going to move beyond simply being reactive to really being responsive. And I think that's also what takes the edge off of taking risks, because now you have that opportunity to evaluate it, to kind of contemplate it, and to figure out what is the right way for us to take these risks that maybe others in our industry don't see. But when we take it now, the short-term pain might be there, but then we've created the foundation that when the conditions change, we're already there, ready to meet our clients' needs, because we anticipated that need was going to come.
Right. Exactly. That's a great point.
And, Doug, I love how early on in your comments you were talking about how what's critical to this process is also that we are, as leaders, creating that culture within an organization. Because so far, a lot of the things that we've been discussing have been pretty much on the individual level. What can I do as a leader? What are the things that I can do to become more comfortable with taking smart risks? So I'd like to broaden that scope. Look at how, as leaders, how do we encourage smart risk-taking within our organization as a whole? Like, how do we ensure that we are, in fact, creating a culture or workplace environments where our employees not only have the permission, but they feel safe in taking smart risks that will benefit our organization and its goals. That we're not just, I don't want leaders listening to this conversation getting inspired and saying, okay, let's put this in place and start putting those things into action. And then, maybe after a couple of months, those old habits start to fall into place. There's fires that need to be put out that kind of take their attention away. And then we start falling ourselves back into playing it safe as opposed to, looking for those opportunities where we should really be pushing ourselves.
Yeah, one of the most powerful things that I've found in doing this research for the book and working with clients is defining what a smart failure is for the organization, in the organization. So we all know what a smart success is, right? You put a plan together, you try it, and it does the exact things you wanted it to do. It makes this kind of money, it moves this thing forward, and you all look back and you go, hey, that was a really smart success. That's great. And I think everyone's instinct then is, let's replicate that. Great. And so that's a good thing, but it doesn't necessarily create the conditions for smart risk taking, because I think you can look at those things and say, well, geez, I don't have an idea like that's going to succeed like that. And I can't be sure that it's going to succeed. And I know they got a lot of attaboys and pats on the back for succeeding, but I'm not sure that mine are going to do that. So I don't know what to do. And it doesn't really motivate and inspire action. But on the other hand, a smart failure does, because a smart failure says, hey, there's some things that you have to do. If you do all those things and you don't succeed, I will have deemed that a smart failure, because you found something worth fighting for. I mean, you had a real reason for being. You did the consumer research to the degree that you needed to, and whatever your consumer or customer is, you took the time. You saw the future now. You put some ideas together around experimentation. You tried that experimentation. You just couldn't get it out of the blocks. You communicated really well throughout the process, and you couldn't get it out of the blocks. That's a smart failure. That deserves a pat on the back. And now we can distinguish between a smart failure and a dumb failure. And now we have something where we can actually say to people, you are going to get reprimanded a bit, because it's not because you failed. It's because of the way that you approached it. And so I think sitting down with your organization and really figuring out, what do we deem a smart failure in this organization to be, is a really important process. I actually came across in my research a framework that Tata, the kind of the GE equivalent in India, it's a global, a multinational company in a lot of different conglomerate, a lot of different industries. And towards the back of the book, there's actually a grading criteria for what they call the Dare to Try Award. Every year they have an innovation award ceremony where they fly to Mumbai, all of the top people that were innovating over the year, and they give awards for the best commercialization and the best early stage development. And there's like 4 different levels. And the final level is the Dare to Try Award. You did your best, you followed the process, and it didn't work out. We're going to fly you to Mumbai. We're going to put you on stage and celebrate you alongside everyone else. And that sent really strong messages that it's about a smart process. It's not just about the outcome. Now, what I don't know is if you I don't think you can probably win 4 Dare to Try awards in a row, right? I mean, at some point the results do matter, but I would venture to say, and I get this data, that if you're doing that over and over again, you figure out eventually how to win, how to succeed. So that, I think, is the biggest. And they actually let me publish the entire framework in the book, and so you can see that at the end of the book. So that's one of the biggest ones. The smaller stuff that you have on a day-to-day basis is just, if you're a leader and you see someone really take a good shot at doing something, but you don't have all the criteria set up on what a successful failure is yet in your organization, you can really just acknowledge through a story in a public setting how we got into it, what the process was, why you're really proud of this person. That sends a really strong message. So acknowledging publicly is really important. I think the last thing is individually, as a leader, role modeling it yourself. trying some stuff, failing at it, sharing with people how you went about it, which signals obviously very strongly, hey, this is an acceptable set of behaviors around here.
I love that last point you bring up, Doug, about sharing your failures, because that's where it becomes really a learning experience. Because if you, as an individual, fail and then you just take that insight and you say, okay, well, what did I learn from it and so forth, you have an incremental improvement. But when it's shared, especially as you as a leader share it, that really gives people that sense that they're reframing how they see failure as not being, oh, this is a mistake, this is a regret, to, okay, how am I going to learn from this so that I'm stronger going forward, and how are we going to collectively benefit from that experience so that we know going forward what to anticipate, which again goes back to our point we discussed earlier about seeing the future. This is in many ways how we see the future, because we've now taken this path, we now see what can happen, so as we go forward, we can now anticipate when that curveball is going to come so we can respond accordingly.
Right, exactly. And as you frame it that way, I mean, it's, this is an insight I think I had while I was writing the book, but it really became clear after I wrote the book. The book's about taking smart risks. It tends to have a business focus and bent to it. In general, people tend to equate it with innovation and things of that nature. But if you step back and look at it at a much more universal macro level, this is really just a book about life. This is a book about how to live an effective life, and then how to help others do that as well. And in so doing, create outcomes that are very valuable for individuals, teams, and organizations, whatever that means for you. I think that in line with what you were just saying about being able to kind of capture that wisdom, share that wisdom, help others become better, it is a recipe for living what I think is arguably, an enjoyable life, that you have a lot of fun, and you can look back and say, hey, that was great. That was a lot of fun. I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's what we all want to do. I think everyone wants to just be able to look back and go, that was a lot. You know what? That was just, I got in it. I got myself a little dirty. I didn't hold back. I tried it, whatever that thing is. And I just left it all out. Left it all out there on the life, quote unquote, field. And I've not come across very many people who, win or lose, succeed or fail, if they feel like they've put a lot of thought and energy and gone after something, that have regretted it. It just doesn't happen. And I think anyone listening, I would imagine that just kind of rings true from a story perspective, because I think that's the human experience. And if I could, say a little bit about, the world that we live in right now, I do think there is that risk of, we've become so compartmentalized, so specialized. And sometimes we, as a result of that, you're a university professor, you're focused on this tiny little narrow silo of a topic in your research, and you're inside of a large organization focused on this narrow piece of the business. I think one of the risks of that is we just lose the general idea of seeing a whole system and experimenting and trying and learning. And I think we've got to fight to keep that alive in ourselves, in our team, in our organization. Because I think as soon as we stop experimenting like that, we're going to be in a world of hurt as a human species. So, as I said, I wasn't really thinking at that level when I wrote the book, but it really occurred to me like this is just everything in life, right?
Right, I agree. And, to your point about how, most of us just want to be able to feel like we took that chance. I remember reading a few weeks ago about a study that was done where they interviewed a large number of retired CEOs and asking them to look back on their 20, 30 years leading these different organizations and ask them what was the things they were happy about, what were the things they weren't happy about. And in terms of regret, none of them regretted their mistakes. What they regretted the most was those times where they said, you know what, I'm not going to take that risk on. I'm not going to take that chance. And they said maybe it wouldn't have worked out, but the fact that they don't know definitively, that's their regret. And so I think this is really what's important for people to realize is that, obviously we're not talking about taking careless risks, but there's certainly these risks where we can see that there is a potential here to do something meaningful, to do something that's really going to change the conversation for the better. And yes, we might not get it right the first time. We might not get it right the second time. But if we don't take that chance and try to figure it out and try to learn from that process, and like you said, of having those smart failures, then we're never really going to move the conversation forward. We're never going to really improve things. And we're going to continue to be in this, as you mentioned, this compartmentalized notion where we just got such a narrow view of things. Because in many ways, that's keeping things safe. It just makes it easier for us to manage things because we're just narrowing our focus to such an nth degree that it limits what we can really push ourselves and what we can really try to accomplish.
Yeah, couldn't agree. I think you said it beautifully. Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so Doug, as I start off our conversation today, risk is certainly a fixture of today's business environment, whether we want it to be or not. So what last piece of advice would you like to leave our listeners with on how they can truly pivot to being able to distinguish those unhealthy risks from the smart ones we've been discussing so they can go forward and really start putting some of the insights you've shared today into action?
Start at whatever level you feel comfortable at. I'll give you an example here. Talking about in the shower, my wife had these soaps she really loved that she just bought from somewhere. I was smelling them. I was like, we could probably make some soap. So I got my 8-year-old son and said, do you want to try to make soap? Yeah, let's try to do it. So we spent the last couple of months trying to make soaps, experimenting with this, experimenting with that. Not rocket science, not tough at all, but a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of commercialization and understanding what's out there. And before you know it, you're kind of like starting to learn a new industry. And hey, isn't this interesting? Now, who knows if this will ever go anywhere? But, it's just a little experiment to try to do something you've never done. I would say start there. Start with just doing something small that's different from your normal routine, and then do another one and another one and another one. And the energy, I think you'll find, will just build. It will just grow. And your curiosity in general, not for any one topic, will just continue to grow. And then at some point somewhere, the bigger leap will present itself, and then you'll decide whether you want to take that leap. And then the bigger leap will present itself again, and you'll decide if you want to take that leap. And I think it'll be 3 or 4 or 5 years later, and you'll look back, and you'll be standing somewhere, and it'll be like the top of a staircase. You couldn't imagine ever standing there when you're at the bottom, but every step just got you a little bit closer, and each step was just a few inches up. But if you don't start, you'll never get to that top step. So, start now, start small, keep moving, and, eventually you're going to find yourself at a kind of a whole nother plane.
Great answer, Doug. I love that. And I have to say, my friend, this was long overdue. And I'm glad we finally got around to having this conversation. I really enjoyed it. So thanks for coming on my show today, Doug. I really appreciate it.
This is great. Thanks, Tanvir. Really appreciate the time.
I've been talking with Doug Sundheim about his book, Taking Smart Risks, How Sharp Leaders Win When Stakes Are High. To learn more about Doug, visit the webpage for this episode at tanvirnasir.com. And that concludes this episode of Leadership Biz Cafe. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we discussed in this episode, as well as what topics you'd like to hear in future episodes of this show. You can do this by leaving a comment on this episode's webpage, or by filling out the contact form at tanvirnasir.com. And if you found my show on Google Play, iTunes, or Stitcher Radio, I'd appreciate it if you could take a moment and please rate my show. Until next time, this is Tanvir Nasir. Thanks everyone for listening.